First, I want to say thank you for inviting me to talk about something that I like a lot, and that's Wi-Fi. Um, it's sad that I can't be there in person. I think everybody is probably feeling the same pressure. So I hope you all stay safe out there. And the good thing with Wi-Fi is you can stay slightly apart. Um, certainly, certainly more than 2 meters. So anyhow, again, thanks for having me. And I'm Mr. Bell. I live here in San Diego. I'm also a UCSD athletic supporter. Okay, that sounded awkward. I support UCSD athletics. My daughter is an alumni who played soccer at UCSD, and actually she still works there. But so you all get a priority on my list of people I want to support. Um, so let's get into it. Here's our agenda. What this talk is about. We're going to go through some definitions for Wi-Fi. We're going to talk about how to find Wi-Fi. I'm going to go over war driving, which if you're new, hopefully it's going to be exciting and educational. Then we're going to talk about attacking Wi-Fi, tools that are used, and of course, references, which later on when we make this presentation available, should provide you pointers to all the material that I'm covering tonight. So who am I? I'm just a guy. I was a system administrator for computer networks in the 90s and the 2000s before I made my full-time transition to cybersecurity. And my current day job is infrastructure cybersecurity engineer. And basically what I do is I make sure that the business has all the proper security controls in place before moving things to production, which keeps us all busy. My lifelong titles, though, I've been a tinkerer since I was a kid. I used to pull things apart. Sometimes I would put them back together. A hacker, if you will, in the good sense of the word, not maliciously. And I'm a perpetual noob. And what that means is, technology is constantly moving, and in order to keep up, you have to keep learning. So it's kind of a lifelong commitment. If you drop out of staying on top of things, it's really hard to catch up. But there's always something to learn. And one of the reasons why I like talking to groups is, each one of you has something to offer, something that I don't know or that you could show me. And so what I'm trying to do is kind of front load that conversation by sharing what I know about Wi-Fi. And you can find me on Twitter at SecureThisNow. That is my mostly technical Twitter account. It's not a super serious account, so you may see shenanigans there, but that's my main online presence. Picture shown here, that's my official DEF CON file photo. They caught me at DEF CON a couple years ago. That is my Wi-Fi hat. Basically, I am recording all the Wi-Fi access points and clients and devices within range and displaying that information on the front of my hat. It's meant to be a conversation starter. It certainly was. And it's become so popular that not last DEF CON because it was virtual, but the one before that, we ran a contest for hard hats. So if you're interested in doing things with hard hats, let me know after this and we can talk about that. I actually have another series on that.
Yeah, actually, I think someone's asking they want one, so hopefully we'll have to bring you back to talk about it more.
Okay. Uh, that's awesome. And actually, I'll bring my partner in crime, Monkey Dragon, which if you go to Hard Hat Brigade on Twitter, you'll see what types of hard hat fun that we had. So this talk, I've got a lot of slides to go through, but it's not meant to bore you. It's more of me taking you kind of along my journey of understanding um, of Wi-Fi and things that are helpful, right? So like literally every slide in this deck could become its own talk on some academic level. There is a lot of depth to this topic. Um, and I think that if you manage to listen through to the end, I suspect that many of you will find things within Wi-Fi that you were are hopefully going to be leaving this talk thinking, yeah, you know what, I think I really want to go and research X, or Y. But we'll get into that. So I spent too much time on that slide. So Wi-Fi defined. Now, again, I'm a perpetual noob. So I've been using Wi-Fi since it came about. In fact, I have one of the original WaveLAN cards, which predates 802.11b, which is what everybody's mostly familiar with. And I didn't know until 2 days ago when I started on these slides. There's actually a dash in the middle. It's Y-Fi. This whole talk, I do not have the dash in there. And I apologize to the Wi-Fi Alliance if you're tuned in, because it is a registered trademark of the Wi-Fi Alliance. And it doesn't mean anything. Wi-Fi literally doesn't mean anything. There's hi-fi stereos or high fidelity stereos, which were common in a common term in the 80s, 70s, 80s. And I suspect that somewhere along the line, somebody called it Wi-Fi, and then they ended up trademarking it, although it does not mean wireless fidelity. But here's the Wikipedia definition. Came out in 1997, called WaveLAN, which I showed you that adapter. And then it became a registered trademark. So the IEEE Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers controls the specifications for Wi-Fi. And Wi-Fi is all under 802.11. There are other specifications that are similar or related, which may get referenced, but I tried to keep this pretty narrow, right? So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Bluetooth, Zigbee, things of that nature. That's, again, those are their own talks. It's just too much to cover all at once. So before we get into, the wireless part of it, we got to talk about what's going on with wires. Before Wi-Fi, we had coaxial cable, mostly thin net, they called it, or thick net, depending on the thickness of the cable. But coaxial cable is pretty much center copper core conductor that carries radio frequencies. So that cable modem that you have at your house is basically pumping out a bunch of RF. That's why when you take them apart, they have a lot of shielding around them so they don't interfere with your TV and things of that nature. Now, Twisted Pair similarly is also dealing with frequencies that are traveling over a wire. The reason why they're twisted is because there's basically if you have things out of phase, they end up kind of canceling each other for noise. And then there's all kinds of variations of Twisted Pair to include shielded and all that. But the main point being, it's all just radio frequency. Now, everybody knows that a secure network the most secure networks are wired networks. And that's because Wi-Fi once you break out of the coax or twisted pair, the RF is going everywhere, right? So coax has shielding, twisted pair, very small signal levels, and also with the twisted pair offsets a lot of leakage. But the key point being, it's all RF. So the difference is we're using air as a medium instead of copper, which can create some situations. Basically, 802.11 is defined around the physical layer being dealing with the air and the radio frequency aspects of it, and then the data link layer, which is some sort of encoding to or protocol standard to kind of accommodate where RF falls short. If you're familiar with networking technology, more specifically TCP or UDP, TCP is connection oriented, meaning that if you send 10 packets, the other end expects 10 packets. If it only gets 9 packets, then it will tell the other side, hey, I need you to send me another packet. That's built into the protocol. And some parts of the data link layer for wireless technology over radio frequency accommodates issues with the physical layer. So I have a question here. What are some of the things that can cause errors at the physical layer for radio frequency? And I'm pretty sure that everybody's experienced some of this. And I just realized that I don't have a good feedback mechanism because I can't see the chat. I'll fill in the blanks for you on this one, but give it a thought. What types of things are problems with radio frequencies?
Yeah, if anyone has any ideas, they can drop it in the chat and I can read them out if anyone has them.
Most often we figure these things out through direct experience, but there are some things that you may not realize are problematic for radio frequency. So, I see somebody drop something in there.
Yeah, they were suggesting crowded frequencies.
Crowded frequencies, absolutely. So interference from other frequencies. And that's what this slide is about. This is the slice. These are the slices of what's called the ISM band, or industrial, scientific, and medical bands. 900 megahertz, or 915 technically. 2.4 gig, which everybody knows 802.11 lives on, and then 5 gigahertz, which is the other 802.11 channels. But you can see these are just a narrow slice in a pretty big spectrum. But what's interesting is 900 megahertz in other countries, because frequencies are controlled by countries. 900 megahertz in other countries is not an unlicensed band, meaning that you need a license to operate. So whenever you hear things like, a radio station or a television station, if you still tune into television over the air, they have a specific license that's been issued by the Federal Communications Commission that allows them to transmit on that frequency. And part of it is planning, right? So radio stations, my radio in my car goes from like 85 megahertz to what is it, 103.9, 104. But when I drive to another state, I have to tune it to other stations. But then there's also a lot of commonality, like 90.3 I can listen to here, or 993.3 I can listen to here. I can also listen to it in Phoenix, Arizona, but it's a totally different radio station. So if you think of it in that way, those would be like specific channels. And the reason why the Federal Communications Commission controls that is because what they do is they make sure that they don't overlap or cause interference with each other. Because if they're on the same channel, it's just going to clash. Well, with computers, it gets a little trickier because we're actually sharing the frequency. We're going to be sharing that channel, and there's some ways around that through modulation schemes. So 802.11 uses multiple protocols to send and receive the data. And, again, I'm just scratching the surface here, but some of those things are how the information is modulated on the radio frequency. And, it basically mandates or dictates how different devices are all going to share the same channel. So when you set up your wireless access point at home, you probably just took it out of the box, turned it on, and you just started using it. Well, there's a lot more to it. By default, it's going to be set on channel 6, which is the center frequency for 2.4. But guess what? So is your neighbor and your other neighbor. And if you live in an apartment, it can get pretty crazy. Your internet's going to be slow, or your connectivity to your access point is going to be slow. Sometimes you can get kicked off. You don't get great range, like your access point is in the living room, and you don't get any coverage in the bedrooms. These are all common problems with a congested frequency band. The other consideration is bandwidth. So more specifically, speed of transfer, right? So how fast you can move data wirelessly depends on these things. The higher the frequency, typically, the faster you can move data, because the higher the frequency, if you remember the equation with time when dealing with frequency, basically you're packing more data in the higher the frequency. The problem with higher frequency is, though, you don't get the range. Lower frequencies have better range than higher frequencies. So if I have any RF specialists out there, you should hold a talk on that, because there's a lot of other factors that go into it, along with, the types of materials that your walls are made of, and interference from other devices, like microwaves.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, somebody said microwaves in the chat.
Yeah, microwaves. Every time your roommate turns on the microwave while you're playing Call of Duty, boy, I'll tell you, it's not going to be a good day. Although I play Battlefield 4 on the PlayStation. You can hit me up for my gamer tag later. I did not get on the PS5 pre-order list, but I digress. So modulation scheme is also one of those factors. As technology's improved, we've gotten really smart at coming up with creative ways to manage the bandwidth that we do have, and do a lot of time division, multiple access type of sharing, or CDMA if you're dealing with cell. It's all very similar. So the cool thing about wireless or any communications protocol is they are all almost exactly the same when you get down to the basics. And then they just start doing things faster now that we have faster processors, more capable radios, because really the frequency side of the house is a function of how fast your transistors can switch, right? So if you think about 1 hertz is 1 tick every second, right? But 2.4 gigahertz is bouncing really fast. Now we've got the next generation of cell technology coming out that's 35 gigahertz, 60 gigahertz. It's insane how fast you have to be able to do things. But you can move a lot more data. Range is shorter, but that's cell technology. But RF wise, similar rules apply. In range, so how fast you're going to go. These protocols are all rated for within the specification, are rated for a certain range, and that is under ideal conditions. That's not passing through a wall or going around a corner in a house or things like that. So you got to keep that in mind. Another aspect of Wi-Fi is multiple in and multiple out capabilities. Somebody got smart and said, you know what, if I put 2 radios on this thing and I have 2 radios on the client, I can use 2 radios and aggregate that bandwidth and basically nearly double my speed. And that's where multiple in and multiple out comes in. Not to be scary. There's nothing scary about it. So when I was talking about channels, this is an example. We'll stick with 2.4 because it's the easiest to explain. And again, the principles apply across all the frequencies. You can see here channel 1, 6, and 11 and 14 are specifically called out because they don't overlap. So whenever you're using channels 2, 3, 4, and 5, those overlap with either channel 1 or channel 6 or the other channels. And likewise 7, 8, 9, and 10, and then 12 and 13. Although 12 and 13 is not available in the United States. Outside of the United States, they use up to channel 14. So like I said, out of the box, your router was probably configured for channel 6. So one of the things you should probably look at is, what is the lay of the land when it comes to Wi-Fi? What are the other channels that everybody else is using? Then it comes down to modulation schemes and bandwidth. So one of the things that I forgot to mention in the previous slide was your clients, basically the Wi-Fi devices that need to talk to each other can only talk if they're on the same frequency, if they understand the same modulation and they support the same bandwidth requirements, and they're within range of each other, right? If they're too far apart, they aren't going to hear each other. It's like me standing in the middle of a field yelling at my friend. Eventually, my friend is not going to hear me as they move out of range, right? Now, when we talk about frequency, they have to be able to hear my voice. So if I'm speaking in ultrasonic range, they aren't going to hear me. So I'm in the same frequency range when I'm speaking to them. Modulation wise, you can kind of equate that to a couple things. One is I'm speaking English, they understand English, they're speaking English back to me. Also, there's other aspects of modulation that are important, which is still, again, very much tied into the basic aspects of communication. We both aren't talking at the same time. I say something, I stop, then they talk, and we have this exchange of information. We both aren't talking at the same time. I'm not raising my voice and then covering over anything that he's talking. And then when you add a third person to the equation, this is where things can get complicated, right? We have to figure out, well, are we going to do the passing the talking stick thing? Or is it I'm just going to wait a second, listen, okay, nobody else is talking, so now it's my turn to talk. And these are all very basic things. It's just computers do it really, really, really fast. And so they're programmed to do it. So that's more about, that's actually more like the protocol, actually. Modulation is how the radio frequency handles it. So maybe not the best analogy, but still related. So here you can see the channel breakdowns for the other specifications. I got 802.11b, which is, the earliest one, widely supported even nowadays, still out there. There's a lot of devices that only speak 802.11b, especially in industrial environments or, maybe municipal, basically companies or organizations that aren't quick to change. And then, the next step up from that, you can see the speed gets better with 802.11g and N. And that one actually uses a different modulation that uses it's orthogonal frequency. Oh, now I can't remember. OFDM is the way that it's the acronym. I can't remember, but basically both the client and both clients have to speak the same modulation scheme there. So in order to take advantage of that, now most access points are backwards compatible. So if you have something that's 802.11g capable, it may also be it's probably 802.11b capable. And this is one of those subtle things that you probably would only notice in an enterprise. If you have an 802.11b only device on your 802.11g network, it may be slowing everybody else down because if it's a single radio and it has to switch between the two different schemes in order to try and accommodate everybody. And within your router, you can configure that so that you can turn it on or off. And then you have 802.11n, which is up to 600 megabits. Oh, and I put the distances on here too. Sorry about that. So 35 meters for, excuse me, 35 meters for 802.11b, 38 meters nominally for 802.11g/n and 2.4. And then 802.11n, 70 meters. And you're thinking, but Bill, you told me that it was a shorter range. 802.11n also has different power requirements in the 5 gigahertz range. So power out is part of the specification as well. But it's not something that really comes into play. Basically, you're either in range or you're not in range. And then, speeds will step down depending on how close you are. So once we break out a 2.4 into 5 gigahertz, this is what the channel breakout looks like. So like I said before, from a channel perspective, these are all non-overlapping, right? So even though 2.4 gigahertz says 3 channels with 20 megahertz of bandwidth, those are the channels that do not overlap, 1, 6, and 11, right? If you use twice as much bandwidth, 40 megahertz, you're covering a wider swath of that spectrum. That's why you're going to end up overlapping with other frequencies. 5 gigahertz, similar. They have bandwidth specifications for 20 megahertz, which is the width on the spectrum. 40 megahertz, 80 megahertz, all the way up to 160 megahertz. Now, in most cases, there's a balance between how wide of a bandwidth I want to use because of interference, interference concerns, because the wider the bandwidth, the more data I can pass, which means it's typically faster from that perspective, right? But if I have a lot of clients and we're all sharing the same radio or radios for multiple in, multiple out, in the same space, there might be a lot of radio frequency contention, and that may effectively, decrease your bandwidth capability and usage. So if you are in a relatively RF free area, like I live in a single family home, which means my neighbors, are not right on top of me or right below me or on each side of a wall next to me, like when I lived in an apartment. I can probably get away with 40 megahertz bandwidth or maybe even 80 megahertz bandwidth on 5 gigahertz. But if I'm in an apartment, I'll probably select 20 megahertz only because that reduces the amount of contention I'm going to have across the frequency spectrum. Now, 6 gigahertz is Wi-Fi 6, and that's a new standard. And you can see why they've been pushing it. It's a newer frequency band because remember, ISM only covered 2.4 and then 5 gigahertz. Well, the FCC went back and said, okay, well, we've got all this IoT stuff, and IoT meaning, like your Nest thermostat, your smart light bulbs, things of that nature. Those were all using, if they're using Wi-Fi, they're all using 2.4 or 5 gigahertz. So there was a need for more channels. And so that's why we ended up with 6 gigahertz, because it adds 1200 megahertz of spectrum and 59 more channels that do not overlap, which is pretty good. Now, there's another little secret with this, with the specifications, more specifically with 5 gigahertz. On the right-hand side, there's a little box that says DFS. DFS is special because those are frequencies that are typically not used in older 5 gigahertz equipment. And you specifically have to turn them on or turn it on in even newer equipment. And the reason why is that frequency range, or those frequencies that are part under DFS, conflict with radars. So radars are used at airports. They're used for weather predictions, or not even near an airport. There's also a number of FAA radar sites as well for tracking aircraft, not near an airport. But it does cause interference on those radars. So DFS as a standard said, you can use these frequencies, but your equipment also has to be able to detect if there's anything that's going to cause interference, and then it would not allow you to use those channels. So DFS is a little bit special, but a lot of people don't know about it. But if you're in an apartment building, you could probably get away with using DFS, and I can almost guarantee very few of your neighbors are going to be on those channels, which means better latency for me, and it's going to make my PlayStation work better, because that's what it's all about. All right, so some basic definitions regarding Wi-Fi. I guess I kind of did this backwards, but because I started talking about RF and channelization before talking about the actual, buildup of Wi-Fi, so I apologize. The first thing that you should be familiar with, and most people are, is an SSID, or a service set identifier. The in italics is an example. Free Wi-Fi, that's everybody's favorite SSID. And excuse me. And then we have BSSID. Now, the BSSID is basic service set identifier, and it looks just like a MAC address because it was modeled after a MAC address. MAC addresses, if you do regular networking, are unique identifiers for devices on a network. And this is important to know because some of the tools that you'll use eventually, if you're hacking on Wi-Fi, may specify the need for a BSSID or an ESSID. An ESSID is an extended service set identifier. And if you look at that, the example I gave says corporate LAN Wi-Fi. And an ESSID is nothing more than an SSID, but an SSID that's used by multiple access points. And I have a diagram for that. Now, the first set of digits in the BSSID or in a MAC address, they are unique to an organization. So some of the tools that you'll use may or may not have access to the OUI database. And the OUI database has a list of all of those first sets of digits and how they cross-reference to the manufacturer. Of course, my favorite being 002091, which is National Security Agency, followed by the one for Commodore computers, which is amazing that they even had networking, had already planned for networking. And then Cray, if you know anything about supercomputers. If you've been to the San Diego Supercomputer Center, I don't know if they still have the Cray. I did a tour of it in 2000 and they had a Cray computer there, which was pretty awesome. Those are like the original supercomputers. So you can check that out. But the OUI, you'll see this come up later when you're doing packet captures and analysis. And it could give you some insight into what your target, any weaknesses that your target may have. So this is kind of an outline of of the relationship between the BSSID, the SSID, and the ESSID. So as you can see on the left, and well, both on left and right, the BSSID, each one of those access points at the top has a unique MAC address. So those are the BSSIDs. Now, if you look at the SSID, they both have the same SSID, which is why within the whole scope, that's considered an ESSID. And that's so that devices can roam from one access point to another. And the reason why this is important to recognize is because, like I was saying, as you're looking through packet captures, you might be focused on one SSID, but if there's multiple access points and you're looking, you figure out what the manufacturer of those access points are, and you know that there are some weaknesses within those access points, you may have to specify the BSSID to make sure that you are verifying each individual access point when you're looking for the weakness. Because oftentimes the way that we get into systems is they will update, maybe they have 100 access points across their whole campus, and they'll update like 87 of them. And 13 of them randomly never got the patch, never got the update, so they're susceptible to whatever that vulnerability is. So that's why knowing the BSSID is important, or at least being able to recognize, that, hey, you're not just throwing a tool against an SSID because you might be missing something. So I hope that makes sense. All right. Now within Wi-Fi, I have to specify there are two modes. Infrastructure mode, which is the most common, which is a device that connects to an access point. But there are other modes, the ad hoc or Wi-Fi direct mode, which, it used to be a little tricky to explain before we had things like Apple AirDrop. So Apple AirDrop, I think Apple AirDrop works over Bluetooth, but is a very similar concept, which is, client to client can get on a Wi-Fi or can share things via Wi-Fi without having to connect to an access point. There's not very many attacks that I'm aware of that use direct mode anymore, but it used to be a thing. But it is also important to recognize, because you may see it on, like in the examples I give, the Nintendo DS uses it for between two DSs. A lot of printers will technically, they end up advertising kind of an access point to say, hey, print, HP printers are notorious for this, with having Wi-Fi turned on by default. Modern digital cameras, often you can download your pictures over BLE or Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. The one thing that burned me was Xbox controllers. So there I was doing a Wi-Fi survey on my house, because I want to keep my neighbors off of my bandwidth, even though they're not that close. But anyhow, I noticed that there's something just hammering 5 gigahertz. And it was like a horror movie, because I'm sitting there and I'm going, oh my gosh, this signal strength is so strong, it can only be coming from inside the house. It turned out it was the Xbox controllers. Yeah, they use 5 gigahertz, and you can go and you can decode the stream and all that if you want to mess around with those. Let me know how it goes. But yeah, it took me a minute. And the way that I figured it out was the OUI that's used by Microsoft is Microsoft. They have their own OUI. But the tool that I was using was not showing me the OUIs decoded. I think it was BetterCap. I think I was using at that time. But Yeah, so that was fun. Anyhow, that's why it's good to know how to identify some of these things, and kind of why I'm going over some of the basics. So let's talk about encryption, right? So the original spec, there was no encryption, and again, with all this radio frequency flying everywhere, um, basically you should treat wireless as an unsecured network. Period. Even though we have um, these security standards that I'm going to talk about, at least for encryption, they all have weaknesses. I mean, WEP came out in 97 as part of the original with 802.11. And then 2003 brought WPA, which was specific to Wi-Fi protected access. Because, I mean, even in 2003, it was pretty easy to crack WEP. I mean, it was probably taking me 10 to 15 minutes to break WEP. And that was on, 2003 equipment. Now it practically automatically cracks with some of these tools. I mean, like in seconds. But that's because computing power got so good. Anything that deals with crypto, if you can encrypt it today, 20 years from now, they will have the capability to decrypt it a lot faster than, it's basically an arms race, if you will, because a lot of encryption should only be used in places where, there's, it would take a monumental effort to decrypt something. And that's typically how we measure these things, right? Which is, well, yeah, they get the file, but it's encrypted and it'll take 3,000 years. If you're using a 600 core server with, with the latest and greatest. Well, that's all well and good, but with Moore's law, if you're not familiar with that, the doubling of processor power every 18 months, those things fell by the wayside. And then there was this thing called GPUs that came out, and somebody figured out how to use a GPU, basically a video card, to do math, which, ooh, yeah, that's some hotness right there. And they just started smashing all types of encryption protocols. So anyhow, back to WPA. It replaced WEP, but it still largely used a lot of the same encryption protocols that WEP used. It just changed how the key initialization was done, and that's through TKIP or TKIP, temporal key initialization protocol. WPA2, which is Wi-Fi protected access 2, came shortly after, because they were like, hey, we need to stem the tide here and stop the data from leaking out. So they made improvements, most significantly adding AES 256 capability, which was a newer encryption standard. Excuse me.
So
And
we
yeah,
have a
go ahead.
question in the chat. WPA is cracked, right? Like somebody's been able to break that encryption.
Yeah, WPA is definitely crackable. And I'll, excuse me, I'll show you a tool later that is very handy at smashing WPA. There's also some other exploits that can be done, which are more attacking the protocol. But yeah, you should not use WPA. WPA and WEP are definitely off the table. WPA2, I mean, it's been around for 16 years now, but they've managed to, continually update certain aspects of it, but its days are definitely numbered. And that's why they're working on WPA3, which is not certified yet. Whoops. Why did it do that? WPA3, which is not certified yet, but some vendors have banded together, and there's like some infighting going on over the different approaches to solving some of the previous problems that you're going to see with WPA2. it's only been around since 2018. It's really more of working on the back end. So kind of like the zero trust networking model, which is, if we don't trust the network wire or wireless in this case, then we really need to work on securing communications more end to end, kind of like VPN connectivity requirements. But, there's some bureaucracy around things like the IEEE, and then there's politicking and some other things that are probably going to hold it up. But it's kind of par for the course, because honestly, any of these protocols, when they came out, it's almost like the beta versus VHS wars, which I just realized you were all probably born well after that. So maybe I'll save that for another topic. But, whenever you have a standards body and there's a lot of people, I mean, the IEEE has, gosh, I don't even know how many members, and they have a process for, going through and fleshing these things out and making sure that it's good before they put their stamp of approval on it. So in the meantime, manufacturers are going to do what manufacturers are going to do, which is a problem because it leads to incompatibility. So even with the WaveLAN device I have here, it says turbo 11 megabit. Well, that was specific to if you were talking to another Lucent adapter, Lucent Technologies adapter. You will see that in commercial stuff too. TP-Link. I remember I had a TP-Link, gosh, probably 8 or 9 years ago, and it advertised the like double the 802.11g. So it was 110 megabits per second, but it only worked if you had another TP-Link device on the other end. So we'll see. And later on, I have a link to a guy named Matthew Van Hoof, who's done a boatload of research on Wi-Fi, and is also responsible for discovering and exploiting some of the vulnerabilities in these protocols. He has really good perspective on where WPA3 is at, and definitely worth following up with. I haven't followed up with him probably in about a year or so, but definitely something to look for. All right, so I kind of talked about the backend stuff that they're focusing on. EAP is one of those. It's an Extensible Authentication Protocol. So again, if it's assuming that the encryption is mediocre across wireless, then let's make it harder for people to get on the network. And the next part of that is authentication, right? So EAP is an extension for that. It's considered a framework because it's used not just in wireless; it's used in other areas of networking. If you think of like 802.1x, which is IPsec, over the network. WPA does support EAP. When we say WPA, we also mean WPA2 and of course WPA3. There are 40 different methods and implementations for EAP. But I mean, you can look at the Wikipedia page for that, and that's definitely an avenue of research that you could go down, because each one of them has their own nuances, and some of them are like a combination of multiple protocols, like Microsoft's MS CHAP protocol is mixed in with some other implementations. It's kind of crazy. As a generalist or as a hacker, you don't, if you're just doing more general Wi-Fi surveys and network work, you don't necessarily need to know all the nuances. But again, that could be its own talk on its own. EAP is considered a best practice on enterprise networks, because even if I can join the network, maybe I do break the encryption, and I am able to get on the wireless link, the access point won't let me access anything else. It won't let me get past that if I cannot complete, authentication through EAP. And that's why most enterprise networks use it. However, you will see how that's a problem also. So Wi-Fi defined, just to kind of wrap it all up. Basically, we're using air instead of wire, which means that everybody can pick it up with an antenna, which poses some problems. Hopefully, some of the things that I talked about struck a chord with you when it comes to understanding, you got to be on the right channel. You got to be listening to the right SSID. Everybody has to do a lot of coordination. And then, really a lot of the networking skills that you would learn on a regular wired network are also very handy when you're doing wireless work. But since we moved from a wired technology to the air, it sets up a whole nother set of attack vectors. And I think one of the challenges with Wi-Fi is your inability to control who has access to it physically, right? You can set up a Faraday cage. You can have Wi-Fi that is enclosed in a room that does not let any of that frequency leak out. Most companies don't do that. It's very expensive to do. Most of those buildings don't have windows. Or if they do have windows, they have mesh embedded in the windows. There's really something to be said for, even just turning the power down on your Wi-Fi, on your access points within your building to prevent leakage. Like, a lot of what Wi-Fi engineers do when they go out and they do installs, at least the good ones, is they will do a wireless survey and they will make sure that every corner of the building is covered from a wireless perspective. But then they should also go outside and make sure that they're not covering the parking lot and they're not covering the building next door and they're not covering the park across the street, because that's where Mr. Bill's sitting. He's sitting on a park bench with his Wi-Fi adapters. Of course, I have a couple within reach. I'm sitting over there with my handy dandy Alpha Wi-Fi adapter, and I am just having a field day. Doing things like finding their Sonos radio on the network and playing my own music in their building. I would never do that though, theoretically, if that was to happen. So yeah, there's definite problems with that. It's almost like somebody left an Ethernet cable laying outside the door in the parking lot, and I just walked up and plugged my computer into it. That's essentially how I would treat Wi-Fi. So before we move on, I'll take questions. And I don't know, do you guys normally take a bio break? Because I got more to go through. I got a lot more.
Yeah, I was looking. We're like about a third of the way through. Yeah, I mean, if you don't need a break, we can keep going. So.
Oh, I'm good. I am going to drink a little more water though, because my mouth is getting dry. I'm sure you guys could tell.
Yeah. So if anyone has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or in the question and answer section.
Yes, please give me questions because I want Chris to be able to transcribe them, and then I want to hire him as my secretary or admin. I'm just kidding. He's way too smart for me. I should be your admin, Chris. So when you make it big, hire me or anybody else in the audience. Because y'all are smarter than me.
It looks like everyone's satisfied. Very well explained so far, they say.
Good. But I do want to make sure that I'm getting people to think about things differently, or at least consider things that they hadn't considered before. So I think this next section, though, is probably going to open things up from that perspective.
Well, before you jump in,
Oh.
somebody was just asking, I don't know if you'll cover it later, if you have any tips to protect your home Wi-Fi.
Yes, I will be talking about that too. But remind me, because if I don't touch on everything, it's kind of interweaved with everything, right? So you want to make sure you're using WPA2 at a minimum. You want to make sure that you have a decent passphrase. You want to make sure you're not conflicting with channels, across your neighborhood. One of the challenges I've seen with most apartment buildings is if you set your channel selection on auto, sometimes if your neighbors is also on auto and the other neighbors on auto, they end up going through this round robin of channels. And it's really annoying because you might be in the middle of a movie and it keeps buffering like seemingly on a schedule, like every 10 minutes, because your router has some sort of timer that says listen to all the channels around me, and then if I have to shift channels, and if it keeps shifting channels, then it never settles on one and you never get a good solid connection. That's annoying. Getting rid of interference, don't leave your router behind the TV, because then it's just in between the wall and the TV and all that RF's trapped. Radio frequency is very much a line of sight equation. So the higher you can get and the more line of sight you can get. But like I said, you might also consider checking to make sure that you're not blasting your Wi-Fi out into the parking lot or in front of your house or someplace that you can't easily see. I mean, like I would notice that if somebody's sitting in a car with a laptop on their lap in front of my house, because they literally would have to be in front of my house in order to make that happen. They couldn't be, next door. Yeah. And then, I'm going to give you some of the tools that you can test your own network. That's what it's all about. Right. So where do we find Wi-Fi? I threw this in here because I wasn't sure of the audience. And even some of the more technology inclined people I know are kind of amazed at where we find Wi-Fi. This right here is the typical home setup. You got the internet on the left, you got your cable modem, and then you have an access point, right? And it's connected to everything in your house, including your smart light bulbs, maybe even your thermostat if you're using Nest or Ecobee or something like that, or your Samsung refrigerator, or your TV, your Samsung smart TV, your Samsung smart dishwasher, your Samsung smart clothes washer, Ring doorbell, cameras, all those things. So the homes are quickly becoming flooded with Wi-Fi, and you may not even realize that you have Wi-Fi. If you got a printer in the last 3 years, it probably has Wi-Fi. And if you don't use that, if you have it wired, then you should probably turn the Wi-Fi off. There are some tricky things that can be done with printers. That there's a lot more research going into that recently too, in the past couple of years, which is kind of spooky. Cars, holy moly. Now that I'm out and I'm surveying in the free world, there are a lot of cars now that have Wi-Fi on board, and most owners don't even know it. Or the owners know it, and it's typically some of the more premium cars. I see a lot of Suburbans have Wi-Fi. I mean, why not? Kids are in the back, we're on a long trip. But you should also consider maybe turning it off when you're not using it. Teslas, oh my gosh, Teslas are terrible with Wi-Fi. Not only do they have Wi-Fi, but they have really good Wi-Fi. Like it's got some decent range. They've participated in DEF CON a couple of years now, and it's been to their benefit because people have consistently broken into Teslas over Wi-Fi, and they get paid because Tesla pays out on bug bounties, which is really good. But more and more cars are coming with Wi-Fi, so that's something to look for. All right, so if you haven't been out in the workplace yet, you may not know that there's Wi-Fi everywhere, especially in industrial areas now. Manufacturing, you may go, this is just a picture I grabbed of the industrial intelligent ecosystem. I mean, there are a lot of control systems that use Wi-Fi, and it's a little spooky. It can be scary. Each one of these is an area that could be considered critical, right? If I'm able to get on the Wi-Fi and monkey around with, say, the air pollution monitoring, I'm killing the environment. But chances are I'm going to be working on the safety and security. I'm going to be hitting up their leakage detecting if I'm really malicious. Definitely communications. Condition monitoring. Condition monitoring is typically things like, valve alignments, pressures, temperatures. There's all kinds of things that can be influenced that are sensor driven and are using Wi-Fi now. They didn't used to use Wi-Fi. They used to have cabling for all of this. But Wi-Fi is very cheap now. It's easy to deploy. There's a lot of low energy options, where the Wi-Fi is very good with power. So they've even got, Ring doorbell, for example, uses batteries. You don't have to wire it in to any type of power source. So just so you know, when you go out in the world and you're around an industrial area, if you are working in any of these industries, you will find Wi-Fi where you least expect it. Another one of my favorites, retail analytics, path to purchase. Oh my gosh, this one drives me crazy. So, and this isn't just Wi-Fi, by the way, this is also Bluetooth. This company here will basically take, and if you leave your Wi-Fi on your phone and you leave your house, that you're getting tracked. More and more stores are starting to adopt this, although it gets even worse. Bluetooth tracking is, I believe, a little bit more prevalent in Wi-Fi now, because most people will turn off their Wi-Fi if they're security conscious, but they still will use Bluetooth. And Bluetooth is, another whole nother topic. But at the same time, just know that they can track people like this. Malls are doing it. I think it's, Westfield over here. I don't know that they have the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth tracking, but I suspect they do, because they do have cameras now on all their information, the information boards. So I have a whole nother topic on anti-surveillance or counter-surveillance. I'm not a fan of surveillance. Actually, we're going to hear more about that anyhow, because guess what the city of San Diego has? Smart cities. So what you're looking at here is a standard light pole, although it does have the little cone on the right. That's a legacy system. But the antennas that are pointing down underneath the street lights, the city of San Diego has deployed 8,000 of these. In fact, they've been in the news recently. They are equipped with both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. Those stubbier antennas are for Bluetooth. They have cameras and microphones on them. They also have temperature and pressure sensors. It's part of the General Electric Smart City platform. And they're recording 24/7. Now, supposedly, it only holds a week's worth of data, and that data is not like the raw video, at least, is not pulled directly into the cloud. All the sensor data is pulled into the cloud. And then that is supposed to be used to generate some sort of analytics package, so we can do things like measure traffic flow and things like that, things that a smart city would do. But from a surveillance perspective, this is a terrible idea. So most people don't know these exist. They're hard to spot unless you're looking for them. So now when you're walking around, make sure you're not walking while you're looking up at the sky. I don't want anybody stepping into the street or running into a pole or something. Just look at the street lights. I know there are a bunch around UTC. Carmel Valley, which is north of the 56, is where they first deployed like the first couple hundred. And these things were just like everywhere now. This is in La Jolla. I actually have 2 at the end of my street, but they all use Wi-Fi. They use mesh networking as well. And the SSID is City IQ, CITY IQ. Now, this is a little more insidious. If you've been downtown, you may have seen these poles. Those have cameras, and it's really hard to tell in this picture, but at the base of the lighting fixture, there are cameras and microphones, and the antennas are integrated into the light themselves. So there's Wi-Fi there too. Oh boy, this one's a hot topic. If your Airbnb has complimentary Wi-Fi, this is another reason why you want to check the Wi-Fi. A lot of these hidden cameras are using Wi-Fi because they're easy to deploy without having to run wiring. Obviously, there are other things that you should be looking at if you are staying in an Airbnb and worried about hidden cameras. Not that I'm paranoid. I am in the security business, though, so yes, I am somewhat paranoid. Wi-Fi will rat out a lot of these things. If you can use tools like Fing, F-I-N-G, connect to the local access point. But you can also look and see if there's any other Wi-Fi hanging out that maybe you weren't aware of. How paranoid you are, it depends on your threat model, right? Just be careful out there. But at the same time, hopefully this will give you some of the tools or at least direction on how to get to use those tools to detect these types of things, because it's terrible. So how do we find the Wi-Fi? Well, it can be as easy as just opening up your phone and looking for all the access points in range or on your laptop. But we're going to need specialized tools if we're looking for something more specific, or we're doing like a site survey, which is why war driving makes sense. War driving is basically identifying the location of Wi-Fi devices within whatever area you're searching. So how does that work? Well, first, let's talk about what war driving means. It's basically the act for searching for Wi-Fi networks, typically in a moving vehicle using a portable computer, smartphone, or personal digital assistant. It was invented around 1999 or 2000 by a man named Peter Shipley. He gave a talk at DEF CON 3 about war driving. And I believe the video is online. I should have put a link to that here where he talks about it. When Wi-Fi first came out, the reason why we were war driving is because I personally did not have Wi-Fi at home. Wi-Fi was very expensive and almost always something that was attached to a business. And so what happened was people were, there used to be this thing called the hobo code, which during the Depression in the United States, hobos, or people who are traveling from place to place, if they if they stopped at a person's house and the person had work, you know, like they were looking for work so they could get food. And if they were able to work and then get food, then they would put these chalk markings on the street so that other hobos, as they came along, would be able to see these markings. And it was kind of a code. It was like, oh, I know at this house, they will give me work, but no food. They'll give me money. This other house, they'll give me work and food and maybe even let me stay the night. So war driving, they actually used to chalk sidewalks so that the casual observer would not notice, but somebody who was looking for Wi-Fi would be like, oh, this place has Wi-Fi. Well, back then, it was really just a way for us to get on the internet, right? My internet connection at home was dial-up. How fast was it in the office? Really fast, right? Certainly not screaming 11 megabit, but boy, I could go down to the local parking lot and I could sit in my car and I could get on the internet. They probably had a T1, which was 1.544 megabits. So that's kind of where war driving started. More recently, though, in the past couple of years, it's also grown to just general detection of technology to include Bluetooth and things like Zigbee protocols, which is used in, smart meters, some of the other IoT devices and things like that. And war driving doesn't necessarily require big, bulky equipment anymore. You can do it walking, running, biking, and skateboarding, and I'll show you how. So this is what a typical war driving rig looked like back in the day. This was not mine. I got this off the internet. The GPS that I had was very similar, but it didn't have a screen that big. And it used a serial protocol. I did not have an antenna like that. I had one that was purpose built with a magnet mount. It looks very similar to this. If you've seen the back of like police cars and it's got the little coil in the middle. This is for, this one's dual band. So it does 2.4 gigahertz and it does 5 gig. So yeah, I still have war driving kit because why not, right? So I'm hoping that some of you will want to war drive after this because when I show you what the capabilities are now, it's going to blow your mind. And then the Wi-Fi adapter, which you can see, they also have the same wavelength card that I have. But laptop, so you needed power. You had to get an inverter for your car, and it was all very expensive. This card in 2003 cost me $80. And now I can go on Amazon and pay 15 bucks for an adapter that is 100 times more capable. Same thing with GPS. The GPS that I have works on, it's a little puck, and I should have had all this stuff staged, but sorry. With a magnet, so it just sits on the roof of your car, everything syncs up, is accurate down to, within, I think it's within 2 or 3 meters. And that cost me like $25. The GPS I had before was 150 bucks because it wasn't meant to be just a GPS for a laptop. It was actually a handheld walk around GPS. And then of course, laptops were ridiculously expensive. So, I mean, you were spending a lot of money on kit, but nowadays everything's much smaller. There's the GPS there, the little round BU353S4. And, Elon Musk is putting up the next generation of GPS satellites. So I'm going to have to upgrade my GPS to get even more accurate. But that's a Raspberry Pi on the left, then a GPS. And I actually have 2 Wi-Fi adapters in here. That white one is 802.11b and N. That version of the TP-Link was very popular. They were 15 bucks a piece. the industry standard, and then TP-Link changed the chipset, and then they stopped working with all the tools. So don't buy the white TP-Links anymore. The Alpha, Alpha is much more supportive of hacker toolkits, but they're also more expensive. That card's like 40 or 50 bucks. And it's also high power, so it sucks a lot of battery. And then there's just a battery pack there. And on the right-hand side, you can see I've got my Camelback with everything wrapped up on it. And I have another version where I have multiple Wi-Fi adapters, and it all fits under my jacket. I put my Camelback on, and then I just put my jacket over it. You can't even tell I'm war walking.
So if I remember right, your hard hat from the very beginning of the slides also is a war driving kit, right?
Yes, it runs the war driving software, and I have a screenshot of that a little bit later. But it does not have a GPS because it's for indoors, and it's more of a novelty. But you could conceivably war drive with the hard hat, and I don't have a display here either. Basically, it's plug and go. Whenever you're done, you that's where I learned about a software enabled switch so that I could gracefully shut it down. But on with this setup, runtime was like 8 hours, so I could walk around or ride a bike or whatever for like 8 hours and just collect data. Now the GPS is important, and I'll show you why here in a second. Because as you move, it's basically plotting where you're at. This is a generic map. It's just representative of how a GPS would plot locations, right? So if you have a single Wi-Fi adapter and you're on 2.4 gigahertz, the war driving software basically cycles through every channel and listens. So 11 channels in the US, and it's listening. It actually does 3 hops a second, and it's totally configurable. You can tell it, no, only do 1 channel a second. Or what I like to do is I like to have 3 2.4 gigahertz adapters, and I have one that covers only channel 6 because that is the most common channel. And then I have the other 2 hop between 1 and 5, and then 7 through 11. Because that gives me more possibilities of catching the signal as I'm going around, right? Now, every time that it detects an access point, it basically takes the GPS location, the access point, SSID, and BSSID, and it records it in a log. The newer software puts it in an SQLite database for even more flexibility with data. Excuse me. Now, the more points that you get, the more times that you detect an access point, and the more GPS fixes you have, the more accurate the location detection will be. And we can take these logs and we can do post capture processing of the data and get even more accurate results. Because maybe I was going one direction at one speed and I was going another direction at another speed, and I was out of range on both ends. But later on, if I combine all the files, and then I'm able to do that analysis. So if you are a data analyst, this job is for you, because there's a lot of ways to slice and dice this data. But we are always looking for better ways to do it. And so we need young, fresh perspectives and minds like yourselves to join the fray and figure out how to do this. So
there's a question in chat
yes,
asking if this is what Google's doing when they do the Street View cars and taking photos and scanning the wireless access points.
yes. And actually Google got sued for that because they were doing more than just picking up the location of the access point. Now, the tools I use are 100% passive. The law gets a little gray around active participation, where I believe what Google was doing, and you can look it up because it was pretty well known. Uh, Google Google Maps vehicles were basically actively interrogating access points because Google knows where my phone is, right? Google also knows, since I have an Android phone, Google also knows my home access point, SSID, and BSSID. So when Google is in the neighborhood, Google is basically fine tuning the location of my devices. They got in trouble for that because somebody who is a Wi-Fi hacker was like, hey, my wireless IDS is going bonkers because the Google car's out front. And then they basically said, hey, you can't do that. This is wrong. It violates, I believe um, what is it? The Computer Abuse Act. I should know this. um, that's why you hire a lawyer. But anyhow, yeah, so they got sued for it. It was definitely a big problem. In fact, some countries don't even allow Google to do mapping, but Google has gleaned enough information off of people's mobile Android devices that it's accurate enough to do street mapping combined with the mapping. So whenever people are in their cars and they know they can correlate the phone's reporting GPS wise to determine speed, and that's how they know they're on a road. Or if it's, this correlation between railroad tracks, for example, if they were on a railroad car. I can't remember which country it was. I want to say it was so there's this guy named Sammy Kamkar. He's done a lot of really good work. Um, it's easy to find him because the way he spells his name is Samy, and he did research into this. You can build Google. You can build an Android phone from source, except for one component, and that's the GPS component. That comes delivered as a binary, and it's not open source. And every Android phone has it. And even if you turn off location services, your phone is still reporting its location to Google, in addition to your cell provider. That talk is for another time, though. But very good question. Yes, Google is definitely vacuuming up all of the access points. So one of the fun things about war driving is this, finding the location of all the wireless devices, and it gives best guess based on what's called trilateration, which I found out is now also more accurately referred to as true range multilateration. And this is what it looks like from a mathematical perspective. And if you picture yourself driving each one of these circles, all three of those circles, that's how you end up getting the fix on the red dot. So when we're war driving, we want to go in circles, or at least as close to circles as we can get. It's not perfect because you're never going to be able to do it in a circle. Most streets end up with city blocks being squares or some other variation. Rarely is it a circle. But this is what it looks like at Liberty Station. So if you were going to war drive and you want to be effective at it, the first thing you do is plot a route such that you can make sure that you are making circles around a place, so that if I had gone down all the way down and then all the way back, I'm not going to be as accurate as if I had gone through and done a circle around every block, maybe two circles around every block, and then just worked my way down. So in my case, you can see I did not do a lot of circles. I actually went all the way down to one end, cut across, came all the way back. You don't see a lot of green in between. And that was a failure on my part, mostly because I was on a bicycle and, you know, we knew we were going to war drive down at Liberty Station because we were trying out all of our equipment, because that's what you do. You got to experiment, right? And it wasn't until later when we went back and we did the analysis and we took all the GPS coordinates out of our logs and created a Google KML file. And this was the result. And in hindsight, I'm like, wow, I'm so dumb. If I was doing this for on a professional level as a Wi-Fi survey, I certainly would have done it differently. But you never know until you get there. And that's part of the fun too. Now, this is what the results look like. Same war drive. This was the results. It took us an hour and 10 minutes to cover all of that on bicycle. And this was, when was this? 2012, I think. So I want to go back at some point. But you can see at that time, there were still 64 access points using web. And what did I say about web? You can smash web in seconds. There's also 532 access points that didn't have any encryption at all, which, you know, guest Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi, whatever. I mean, you can look at the names on here. If, I'm hoping some of you can read them, or I'll read some of them off for you. Like direct H is 80HP. That's definitely a printer. Chromecasts can be fun too, because they use them a lot of times on you know, status boards. But you know, if I were to do something theoretically, you know, play my own movie instead of their menu. Wireless net, guest, Cox Wi-Fi, HP setup is another popular one. You want to set up somebody's printer for them, you can help them out. Cable Wi-Fi. Yeah, so it's just the gamut. But you will start noticing some trends, right? Like 2-wire 243. You're going to see a lot more 2-wires. 2-wires AT&T's. At the time, AT&T's internet service, they would always set them up by default. So one thing is that you knew it was default setup because it would say, you know, they would use the 2-wire SSID. But that's not necessarily a bad thing either. And I'll tell you why, because, well, let me talk about this before I move on, because I'm about to blow everybody's minds and scare you all at the same time. So the one that says other, those were WPA2. So at the time, WPA, there was 2,583 access points that were at least using WPA. And remember, this was, you know, almost 10 years ago. WPA was still okay, right? But WPA2 was definitely the way to go. And that's what other ended up showing up as. So that really kind of drove me crazy, because I'm like, what's this other? This is annoying. You know, we went back and forth, we looked at the data, and we figured out that it was WPA2. But yeah. Now, what am I going to do with all this data? Sharing is caring. So everybody who's online, if you get anything out of this talk, you can use this parlor trick at home, and that's going to wiggle.net. That's 1G, WIGLE.net. These folks have been cataloging war driving efforts for as long as I can remember. My first upload was in 2003. Now, I don't know if we have any freshmen in the class who are 17 years old, but most of you were probably still in diapers when I was uploading to wiggle.net. That just makes me old. But like I said, we're all noobs, so we're all still learning all the time. But wiggle.net are OG. like OG, along with some software I'm going to show you. They're really cool people. Like I can email them and say, hey, I have a question, and they will answer it. It's insane. I mean, in this day and age. Anyhow, they also have an Android app that they've produced to support their efforts in war driving. And you can basically take your files and you upload them to Wiggle, and you can do it anonymously, or you can set up an account, set up a team. You can do all kinds of fun stuff. A friend of mine, he was in the top 100 war drivers last year, which, you know, doesn't sound like a lot, but you can see here where it says stumblers, there's 210,000. As of 2018, there was 210,000 people uploading results, and he was in the top 100. And that's because he worked in Nigeria. Nigeria has a lot of Wi-Fi. They also don't have a lot of war drivers. And this guy was just racking up the numbers. Now, that said, there's a lot of places that are adding Wi-Fi capabilities all the time. I mean, the city of San Diego added 8,000 new nodes in the space of 2 years. So somebody was going to get credit for all those new nodes. But wiggle.net is, it takes the approach of information should be free, right? You're in a public place, you have radio frequency blasting out. If I can pick it up from the street, I should be able to record it, right? Very much like if me as a private citizen has a camera, and actually that's a lot of the surveillance technology arguments. They say, well, you're in a public place, right? You have no expectation of privacy. Wiggle.net though gets a little spookier, because if you have a unique SSID, or I can also look it up by BSSID. If you set up an account here, it's free, and you go on there right now and you plug in your BSSID or your SSID, it will put a dot right next to where you're at, because at some point somebody war drived past your house and they plotted your access point. Now, why is this keep moving? I'm not touching the touchpad. Sorry about that. So the reason why this is concerning is because your phone, Apple doesn't do it so much anymore, but there's ways around it. If you left your Wi-Fi on, it would be beaconing. It's looking for ATT Wi-Fi. It's looking for 2-wire, whatever. It's looking for, UCSD, not a frat house, or FBI surveillance van SSID, right? And if I could identify that your phone specifically was looking for a unique SSID, then I can come on Wiggle and I can see places that you've been, and maybe even frequent. So for a while it was pretty creepy, right? Like you could legit find people. So that's why having a unique SSID may not be the best idea. But you also don't want to match something that's the default of something else. So you do want to change it. So if I were to have Spectrum cable internet, of course I already said I did, I would probably name my access point 2-wire something something, so that it looks like AT&T service. Because maybe someday a Spectrum router, although I don't use a Spectrum router, but if I did, if there's a weakness discovered in that make and model of router, or if I'm working off of default credentials, right? So you're probably going to be helping your family set up their Wi-Fi, or you could help them to make sure that they're not getting, they're not getting unwanted people on their network downloading BitTorrents, and it's the neighbor kid. You know what I mean? Those types of things. So wiggle.net, I think I've gone on plenty long enough on wiggle.net. We still have a lot more to go. I'm going to pick up the pace here, and I apologize because, like I said, I could talk about Wi-Fi all day. So why should you war drive? It's a fun way to learn about Wi-Fi and security. It touches on a bunch of aspects of of security. It's also, something that more and more there's surveillance technology going in that uses Wi-Fi, mesh, and IoT protocols. It requires you to leave your desk and go outside. I mean, come on. Even in lockdown period, you could still get away with war driving. Certainly from a professional perspective, doing site surveys, detecting rogue devices. We used to have this problem where employees would plug in their own access point under their desk because they didn't want to plug their laptop in. I know it sounds crazy, right? And of course they didn't have security on it. So our corporate network had all these rogue access points. You got to go find them and you got to go shut them down. Well, the only way you can find them is if you're able to geolocate them, and war driving facilitates that. All right. Pause for questions before we get into attacking Wi-Fi. I'll wait until Chris gives me the signal.
Yeah, I'm just giving them a couple seconds to type something up.
Do we still have all the attendees on there?
Yeah, we're at 15 people. So
okay, cool.
Seems like you're keeping everyone entertained.
I hope so. I mean, I can do tricks, card tricks or something. I can show you my sticker collection, like Hack the Planet. I will not be showing you my desk because it's a train wreck right now between soldering stuff and Wi-Fi. All right, no questions. Let's talk about how to attack Wi-Fi. Now, there's a general workflow, and this goes with almost every type of offensive security approach. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to collect information. OSINT, open source intelligence. If we are attacking, say, theoretically, we're hired by a company to attack their Wi-Fi infrastructure. Let's say Walmart hired us. Well, maybe not Walmart. Let's pick a medium-sized company. This is more effective on medium-sized companies. What's a medium-sized? Jerome's Furniture. Let's say theoretically Jerome's hired us. Jerome's Furniture is I believe a San Diego based furniture company, right? They have point of sales terminals. They have, like multiple locations, things of that nature. Now, open source intelligence is basically scraping the internet for any and all things that you can find out about a certain entity that may aid you in exploiting them. And this applies to Wi-Fi too, because in some cases you might come across things like, Daytel data systems down in Kearney Mesa. Maybe they advertise that they're one of Jerome's partners and supply all of Jerome's furniture, computer needs, right? And you could probably imagine maybe even some of their Wi-Fi infrastructure. So that might be helpful later. Other things OSINT wise, if you're doing any password work, there's a whole field of how you can create custom word lists based off of people's social media profiles, their LinkedIn, their mostly social media, because, people like to use passwords that are similar or easy to remember, like anniversaries, birthdays, their kids' names, their dogs' names, things like that. Well, if you throw all those things into a bucket and you create a custom word list, you might also be able to crack their password faster. So that's one aspect of it. Physical and virtual recon. Physical recon is important because if I can identify what manufacturer or the actual Wi-Fi infrastructure by going into the store and looking around, and I'm like, oh, wow, that's an Aruba. And I know that Arubas, it looks like a newer one. Newer Arubas have this problem where when you first set them up, most of the installers use the Bluetooth capability to set them up. And then they, because they have like a tablet and an app that uses Bluetooth to configure the access point for the wireless aspects. And then they forget to turn the Bluetooth off later. So that was actually a big problem. You can look that one up. So that's why physical recon works, right? You figure out the manufacturer of the device. You can maybe determine the model numbers. There might be specific vulnerabilities if they haven't updated their firmware. Virtual recon, very similar. Like I was saying, if you're, it kind of ties in with the word driving, which is next, right? It's like looking at the OUI, the manufacturer of the equipment, you can derive some information about maybe these are all Arubas, maybe they're a knockoff brand, maybe they're Microsoft, maybe they're Cisco, whatever. That'll provide insight. Social engineering kind of ties in with physical, can tie in with physical. I don't like to do social engineering because I'm not a social engineer and I don't like to lie to people. I think that, there are people that do that and it's very much a thing. But there's a lot of information you can derive by just calling somebody and saying, hey, I'm stuck over here at store whatever, and I'm trying to get on the Wi-Fi and I can't remember what the password is that we use across all the stores. And then they give it to you. So that's, but that's like trivial, right? Now you're just going to collect information. It may be useful, it may not be. And you're probably not going to spend as much time as, it's always a time related issue with anything security related. Only the most dedicated folks will eventually prevail in the most secure environments. And typically when people hire you to do a pen test or something, they're only hiring you for like a couple weeks, not for a full year where I can plant a Wi-Fi device in the bushes and pick it up and drop it off every week with a new battery and let it just sit there and collect information. That's a possibility though. And I've heard things like that. Or maybe if I'm close enough to one of those one of those smart city things, I can just point an antenna at it and suck down all the data that it's given out and then make correlations based off of that and maybe crack some of the passwords. That's where the advanced persistent threat comes in. Next up is scanning and identifying your target, right? Monitoring the Wi-Fi, doing the word driving, going back and doing packet analysis. If Jerome's hired me, I'm going to be looking for Jerome's infrastructure. They may not name their access points Jerome's Wi-Fi. They might call it, I don't know, JFS, Jerome's Furniture Store 001, whatever the store number is. That's one way to figure out stuff like that out. The SSID might be specific to that. It might even say point of sales or POS, like Jerome's POS, and then the network guy thinks he's being funny because POS can mean other things. But that's how I'm going to figure out those targets that I'm looking for. And I'm not just looking for an SSID. I'm also looking for BSSIDs so I can target specific access points if it comes to that. The next step is enumerating all the capabilities. Are these all, 802.11b? If they don't support any of the newer modes, that tells me it's really old equipment, right? Like 802.11b has been around, like Bill said, since what, 97? And maybe they installed their Wi-Fi infrastructure in 2003 or 2002 or something, and they never updated it. If it doesn't support, something as simple as 802.11g, then I can almost guarantee that those access points are vulnerable because somebody will have found something in firmware that makes it easy to compromise them. You also want to look at how many access points they have. What kind of services are they advertising? That's where, like I was saying, you can kind of derive, the age of the equipment, if you will, based on the capabilities it has. If you see WPA, but you don't see WPA2, it may be that that equipment's too old, which means it's 2003, because 2004 WPA2 came out. WPA2 adoption was pretty thorough, you would think by 2010, although of course, I just showed you some war driving results where that wasn't necessarily the case. And then, then you start to get a picture for what your attack vector is going to be, right? So packet analysis, again, is another aspect of that, because you'll be able to see what type of encryption protocols are they using? Are they using EAP? Are they using TCAP? And being able to tailor things that way. So once you figure out what your attack vector is going to be, then you're going to execute that attack. And if you gain access, great. But if you don't, then you need to go back and you need to redo everything again. Not necessarily redo it, but maybe spend more time collecting information. Now, I left out the more popular aspects. Everybody almost always jumps straight to, let's grab some handshakes, which is part of the encryption transaction, and let's throw a couple GPUs at it and crack the hash. You don't need to do that if there's already other problems or if there's other ways to do it. And I'm hoping that I can cover some of these or give you, some food for thought on how to craft an attack, right? I do have to give the disclaimer. You should only do this on networks that you have explicit permission to do so. My recommendation is to set up a home lab, and I talk about that a little bit later. Certainly, this takes practice and persistence. Wi-Fi is a radio frequency based technology, and RF can get weird. If you're a ham radio operator, you probably understand it a little bit more. But even if you're not a ham radio operator, just know that sometimes RF carries really good, really far, and sometimes it doesn't. There might be interference from who knows what. Actually, that reminds me, I did get interference from one of my power bricks on an old laptop. It was just getting old. Something happened, and it was just like my ham radios were like just constant static unless I moved out of the room. My Wi-Fi was starting to dog. I was like, what the heck's going on? And then one day I'd turned something off, and I could physically hear it buzzing. And then when I unplugged it, Wi-Fi got better, ham radios got quiet. Yeah. So anyhow, only things you have permission to do so. So one of the security features that some manufacturers have is you can hide your SSID. Yeah, you're probably hiding it from, I don't know, anybody who's over 60 who's never touched a computer. But finding SSIDs is pretty trivial, especially if you're just using a passive monitor. Any of the war driving type of tools will easily pick up SSIDs and BSSIDs because you'll see all the traffic. That's the best part I love about passive tools, is it's just listening, because there's all this stuff going on that you can just sit there and you can just vacuum it all up and then do analysis on it. Similarly, MAC address filtering. MAC address filtering is interesting because basically it's setting up your access point so it only allows certain clients to participate in the network. So if it gets a request to join the network and that MAC address doesn't match, it basically says no service for you, no soup for you. Well, basically what you do is you sit there and you figure out what clients are attached to that access point, which again, most war driving tools will tell you. And then you pick a quiet client, and then you just duplicate or clone the MAC address, and Bob's your uncle. Then you're on the network. So it's really easy to bypass. Bypassing access portals. So you're on the airplane. I know this isn't necessarily a Wi-Fi attack, but it is possible in a lot of cases to just bypass it by setting up a VPN and configuring it to use port 80 or port 443, which typically has a pass-through setup. Yeah, your methods may vary. Open Wi-Fi should always be considered hostile. So when you're sitting at Starbucks and you jump on the Wi-Fi there or whatever, McDonald's, whatever, you should consider it hostile. You should never do anything on an open Wi-Fi access point without first having your VPN engage, because you can do things like poison DNS or just monitor people's communications in general. Now, a lot of it's encrypted, but there's some other strategies around that I'll talk about in a second. Was there a question? Sorry, I thought I heard some. So poisoning DNS, what's that mean? Well, that means that every website that you visit, you put in www.google.com and it goes to a DNS server, which translates that into an IP address. And if I'm on the network and I go, oh, they're asking for google.com, and I serve up google.com with an IP address that I want you to go to quicker than the DNS that you requested it from, then I'm basically beating you to the punch and giving you a malicious website to visit that looks like Google, smells like Google. And then when you log into your Gmail, I just scraped your creds. So that's one evil way. Excuse me. Oh, shoot. Did I? Okay. Yeah. So I kind of touched on encryption because, yeah, there are still problems with encryption. I know I said that people jump to it, but there's other ways to do it. But, it's still from a fun factor or challenge factor. I think that exploiting the weaknesses in encryption can be very rewarding. Sometimes you'll need an active tool to do it, although rarely have I, well, yeah, in combination with a passive tool. And when I say active tool, basically you are trying to connect to the access point, or you are forcing other clients to connect to the access point or kick them off the access point, so passively monitoring for handshakes is one way, because this four-way handshake, which sets up the initial encryption scheme between a client and an access point, it's not happening on a regular schedule. It only happens when the client first joins. Well, if there's a bunch of devices in this building, and maybe they're IoT sensors, or maybe they're the refrigerator at your house or whatever, they're not jumping on and off the network all the time. So sometimes you got to give them a little nudge, and that's where that's where de-authing, which is that active method. You can kick the client off the network, and then it has to reinitialize the encryption. And there's a four-way handshake that has to happen in order for that to happen, in order for it to establish encrypted comms, which is part of the TKIP process. And that's where you can derive information from the handshake and do what we call hash cracking, which is brute forcing that hash to capture the passphrase or the actual key. Now, there's a whole school of thought behind how to brute force things. I will tell you some common things. Like I said before, if somebody set up a default AT&T access point, I believe the user manual specifies that the access point is set up with a 10-digit number by default. And typically there's a sticker that is attached to the bottom of the access point that will show you if it's like an AT&T service. I'm not talking like enterprise, but like medium-sized business or home stuff. Even your router at home or your access point at home has a default password that's probably on a sticker on the bottom, but some of them follow, they used to follow very lame standards. So the AT&T ones were literally 10 digits. So no, not alphabetic letters, just numbers. So 10 numbers. So what that meant is if I have a hash cracking setup that is brute forcing and trying everything from 0, 10 zeros all the way up to 10 nines, eventually I'm going to hit the key, right? And the reason why these are dangerous attacks is because it's typically done offline. Once I have the handshake, I'm going to take that hash and I'm going to attack it offline, which is how the iCloud hack happened. If you remember that, people were able to download celebrities' iCloud backup. It was encrypted. Apple's very serious about security. But the problem is because it was offline and it wasn't going to lock them out after 3 tries, they could just hammer it for 6 months. And that's what they did. And that's how they ended up exploiting all those files. Well, the same thing applies here, but instead of the brute forcing happening across, numbers, digits, special characters, anything from eight character minimum to, 32 character maximum, that'll take me forever or a lot of computer horsepower. So that's why you try and figure out what are the defaults? What do the defaults look like? Newer routers, it's very interesting. I can't remember, I think it was a Spectrum one. They used 2 dictionary words, both five letters, and then a 3-digit number at the end. So if I was going to create a word list to brute force it, I would take the dictionary and I would basically dump every 5-letter word into a file. And then with the tool, which I'll talk about in a second, Hashcat, you can specify rules and say, take every combination of all the words, and then in the 3 digits on the end, cycle through every iteration of 3 digits. So that just took my hash cracking from a million years down to something more manageable. And I say something more manageable because it really depends on your equipment. But that's how a lot of encryption gets attacked. Well, until these newer ones. Well, so RC4 no more, which I note at the bottom, is to record and decrypt packets that use weak encryption. So RC4 was one of the earlier encryption protocols, or algorithms rather. And if you look up that specific attack, it will give you all the specifications for how it does it. And that's just as easy as listening and then exploiting weaknesses in that encryption algorithm, which those are always the worst because you literally have to go back and well, everybody's going to have to upgrade firmware, but the algorithms are typically the worst if they're weak. That's how we end up having to do things like come up with AES 256, which I think took like 8 years to develop and approve. Or you can exploit weaknesses in the protocol. And when I say protocol, which is more like the method of using the algorithms, right? So crack attack, the key reinstallation attack, this one was exceptionally dubious because basically what was happening is this was another Matthew Van Hoof attack, and he's got a full paper on, I linked it at the bottom. Go look at his site because he's got all the academic papers on how he developed this. Crack attack was terrible because basically you had secure connection between 2 devices, and this one forced it forced the key to be reinstalled such that it basically tripped up the comms between the two devices. And then the first couple packets after that were sent without any encryption. Now, it doesn't seem like much, right? Because you're like, oh, it's just a couple packets. But he constructed an attack such that he could sit there and, of course, once you script things and you create a tool that does it, it can do it really fast. He was able to start deriving important information from the data. So even though it only uncovered a couple packets here, a couple packets there, he was able to make it a little more regular and then derive useful information to exploit the overall system. It's brilliant. But that's the type of research that, you know, some of the folks hopefully in the audience would consider. So please make sure you visit his website, because the type of work that he does involves a lot of math, way over my head, but also some practical application. And it's definitely been a game changer for the industry. So check it out. All right, other things, rogue access points. If I set up an access point that's giving out free airport Wi-Fi and I'm at the airport, do you think I'm going to get a few people to connect to my access point? Yeah, you better believe it. I don't even have to name it the same. Like at San Diego Airport, I think it's called SAN Free Wi-Fi, SAN, all caps. I can literally just call it free airport Wi-Fi, and I can guarantee you I will get people to connect to it because they just don't know. But even if that doesn't work, then I can do the evil twin access point where I impersonate an existing access point, which everybody already has loaded in their phone as a trusted network. They go automatically connect to this SSID. And I'll just start collecting things there. Now, why is that bad? Because I end up being the monster in the middle. If I'm providing your internet access, I can also do other things like decrypt some of your traffic in between your device and the internet using something called SSL strip. That's one of the tools. It used to be a little tricky to set up and everything, but now there's tools that do it automatically. The monster in the middle attack can also be pretty insidious because you don't have to actively be trying to connect to an access point. If you leave Wi-Fi on your phone or a device like your tablet or something, and your tablet's like, ATT Wi-Fi, where are you? 2Wire, where are you? Linksys, where are you? FBI surveillance fan, where are you? The way that software works is it listens and it goes, oh, they're looking for Shay Gonzalez 256 SSID. And they go, I'm Shay Gonzalez 256 SSID. And then the device automatically connects. And so it assumes the identity of the probe network. And then it provides a connection to the internet on the back end. And every time your phone switches from cellular to Wi-Fi, or I mean to Wi-Fi and then eventually to a wired internet connection, anytime it changes to another connection like that, it tries to re-authenticate everything. This used to be a really big problem until folks got smart, and now they do this thing called certificate pinning for TLS, and that's a little bit harder to work around because the monster in the middle attack tools were also able to dynamically generate SSL certs so that the little lock in the top of your toolbar from your device to the laptop that has the tool, the connection was encrypted. And then from the laptop to the internet, it was encrypted, but in the middle, it was unencrypted. And all the devices on both ends were happy thinking that they had an encrypted connection with each other when in reality they didn't. If you're interested in that avenue of inquiry, check out certificate pinning and any of the TLS protocols. All right. So let's talk about tools more specifically. Are there any questions before I move on? I didn't expect to take this long, and I apologize if you were hoping it was going to be a short one.
Before we, I guess, move on, there was a question about earlier.
Yes.
Just what potentially could you even do to protect yourself from ward drive tracking?
So you're never going to be able to protect yourself 100% from a ward driver, and like as long as you are on a wireless network, I can see at a minimum the MAC address of both of the devices and the SSID that you're associated with, even if you're not broadcasting the SSID, because there's all these management frames that are being passed back and forth at the physical layer or the data link layer, right? Not necessarily IP. This is below IP, just managing the wireless connection. And that's why, like I was saying, wireless should be considered untrusted. And also, I should point out, wireless is not considered air gapped. If you hear somebody talk about an air gapped system, that was before wireless. An air gap system, well, even now, technically an air gap system is two systems that are separate from each other and they have air in between them. That used to be a thing. There was no wires connecting them for security reasons. Secure network on one side, unsecure network on the other side. And now that we have wireless, which uses air, technically it's an air gap, but it's not because they would be connected. So that's why a lot of secure systems don't have any wireless capability at all. Does that answer the question?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess what I was saying is I would add the anonymity part of it. You know, like I said, if I go onto Wiggle and I have a very specific SSID, I can locate my house pretty quickly. If I'm using something that's more common, it's kind of like having a very unique name, which had I known where we would be in 2020, both of my children have unique names. Like they're one of one in the United States. So it's really easy to find them. I have a very common name. So there's like 2,600 of us just in California alone. So if you think of it from that perspective, it's almost better to have a common name for your access point. So yeah, I wish I had better news, but yes, Wi-Fi is insecure. All right, so tools. It requires a lot of experimentation. Like I said, you're not going to be doing a lot of these things on just any network. And if you're doing it professionally, that means you probably practiced on your own stuff a lot before you do this, because time is money when you're on the clock to do a lot of this work. And that's one of the challenges, right? I've been lucky enough that, you know, I have a passion for it. So I just do this stuff on the side, a lot of the stuff on the side. I have been on professional engagements where I've had to use, you know, Wi-Fi survey tools and things of that nature. But there's a lot more. There are people who do this like every day and are really good at it. And that's all they do. And so if I needed those types of services, I would hire them instead of doing it myself. Unless I don't have a budget, in which case then yeah, I would do it myself. But even if you're just a casual practitioner, you'll gain a lot more understanding of how Wi-Fi works for those nuances that I was talking about, right? Like the, you know, the location. Why is it if I move this access point 6 inches to the right, everything works great, but I move it back and it's terrible, right? And then you have to work those things out. Interference and, you know, I mean, there's all kinds of oddities with radio frequency. So if you're going to set up a home lab, these are just two examples of this is really all you need to get started. Obviously, I didn't include a GPS. You don't need a war drive with a GPS even, unless you want to actually do the geolocating and things. But you can sit down and you can use the $16 Wi-Fi adapter, $17 Wi-Fi adapter, and you can suck down all the Wi-Fi around you within 2.4 gigahertz. There's also a dual band version, which is the PAU07, which does 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, and also the PAU09, which does both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. But, if you're just starting out and you get one of these travel routers, which not only does this travel router cost $20.49, and it actually has 3 modes, which, if you want to protect yourself when you're on the road, you can set up a VPN within the router. It's really easy to set up and tell it, there's an option called internet kill switch where it won't let your device that you're connecting, like your laptop, you connect your laptop to this, it won't let you access the internet until the VPN is up, which is bypassing all the garbage next to you. So if you're at a Starbucks, it's really cool. It runs off a USB, and basically you can tell it, I want you to connect to the Starbucks access point, and it will, and it'll set up a VPN, and then you can either connect wirelessly to it, or you can plug a wire in from your laptop to it. Or if you're at a hotel and they have a wired connection, you can plug a wire in and it will set up a VPN over the wire, and then it will act as an access point to your laptop, or you can plug into it. It's very versatile. But, if you're practicing smashing Wi-Fi, you can actually, you can set it up with web, you can set it up with WPA, and then you can attack it. And then you can try all the other fun stuff, monster in the middle it, clone the MAC address, poison the DNS. I mean, obviously that requires a couple other devices, but it's really, it really isn't an expensive hobby to get into. The capabilities are crazy. Now, that said, understand there are a lot of really, really serious people out there who are doing bad things, who might have 10 adapters, but their total input is it's less than $200. I mean, that's nothing anymore, right? But anyhow, set up a home lab. All right, so one way to start out is you can start out with a full operating system like Kali Linux, Parrot OS, Black Arch Linux, Pen2. These are specific for pen testing. Now, some of them you can boot off of, I think all of them you can boot off of USB if you don't want to like overwrite your hard drive, things of that nature. But if you want to see what kinds of tools are out there, these are going to be up to date with the most popular tools, and they're going to be pre-configured if there's any configuration necessary. So it's always not a bad place to start if you're a beginner. I myself like to start with a vanilla Ubuntu install and install the tools myself, and then configure them myself so that I understand what they're doing to the system. But that's just me. Your methods may vary. If you're just messing around, and then you can, set it up in a VM even. Some of the capabilities get a little weird with USB though. But that's why I also like the Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pi, you can load even Raspbian OS and load any of these tools I'm going to talk about. Most of the tools on here I'm going to talk about. You can load those on a Pi as well. But you don't have to spend all the time configuring if you're doing it this way. Now, this is another, if there's anything you get out of this talk, if you want to know how to do anything in Wi-Fi, start with the Aircrack suite. There's multiple tools within the Aircrack suite. I only listed a couple that are extremely important. AirMon is for putting a wireless adapter in a monitor mode. What is monitor mode, Bill? Well, when you set your access point up and then you set your wireless adapter up to connect to that access point, it starts its own conversation just between the access point and any other Wi-Fi around it, it ignores. Monitor mode puts it into a mode where it opens it up and it accepts any and all traffic, which means even things that are not destined to your MAC address on your Wi-Fi adapter, you can see. So if Chris is sitting next to me with his laptop, I will see his conversation too. And everybody else around. Sorry, my throat's getting dry. So that's where monitor mode comes in. Arrow dump is a tool that once it's in monitor mode, you can tell it to filter out everything except this one access point or this one conversation. Or you can say, I want you to collect as much as you can on channel 2 or channel 6 or whatever, and write it to a file. It also has a handy display. So you don't have to write it to a file and do analysis. You can do analysis on the fly. It will give you all the access points ranked by power. You can filter it 16 different ways. You can specify what channels you want to listen to. You can specify channel hopping. It's a very, very powerful tool. Now, the best thing about the AirCrack suite, it's been around a long time, 2006. That's 14 years. They also have documentation on there. If you go to the link on the bottom, the documentation there, although it's covered, isn't it? The last bit. I need to send the brief out is what I need to do. Their tutorials will walk you through all the basic elements of Wi-Fi that haven't changed since Wi-Fi has been invented. Even though you might be cracking web, this is annoying because my display changed, sorry. Even if you're not, even if eventually you're going to be looking at WPA2, a lot of the same aspects of how you got there apply. So I really like their tutorials, and it gives you insight into how Wi-Fi works at a more basic level beyond what I just described in the first hour of today. So Air Replay, that's another fun one that basically listens, collects packets, or I'm sorry, with using your Arrow dump, the stuff you recorded with Arrow dump, you can actually replay conversations. And in some cases, you can replay. There's a switch in there that basically forces the access point to renegotiate the encryption as you're basically it simulates trying to connect to the access point by replaying the same packets over and over again. And that's a common WEP attack, because what happens is the access point, every time there was a partial connection to the access point would hand off this value called an initialization vector, or an IV. And what some really smart math person figured out, this is again an attack on encryption. If you collect enough of these initialization vectors, you can actually derive the key out of it. But it's like 80 to 120,000 of these keys. Well, in a normal day, you might get 2 or 3 devices that attach to the access point. So you got to be listening. You might be listening for 16 years and never get enough. So what they figured out is if you script this way to replay certain packets to the access point will give up an initialization vector. And I mean, it's as fast as you can go. And I've done it where if I'm sitting right next to the access point, like literally in 30 seconds, I have over 100,000 of these IVs. Or if I'm sitting in my car in a parking lot, because of the range and the distance and things like that, it might take me 15 minutes to collect 100,000, but that's still, like literally as soon as it reaches that certain threshold, it's able to tell you what the key is. it's crazy. And then aircrack NG, which is the original kind of hash cracking tool. So it's got some strategies in there for some of the more advanced tools. You can run it on a Raspberry Pi. It's all command line. It gives you a very nice little interface over a text-based interface, which I should have included a screenshot, but I'll show you similar screenshots here in a minute. Aircrack NG. Again, that's another, if there's anything I tell you, just make sure you're checking that out. All right, Wireshark. Wireshark is not actually specific to a wireless tool, but it is the most handy tool on the planet if you're doing anything network related. Certainly if you're doing any pen testing or things like that. Similar to capturing PCAPs on a wired network, you can do the same thing with a wireless network. And everything that you recorded with AeroDump in the AirCrack suite, if it's saved as a PCAP file, you can open it in Wireshark and do further analysis here. Excuse me. Or Wireshark even allows you to collect information based off of your Wi-Fi adapter, a certain channel, and a certain set of bandwidth. And it also does other things like reconstructs conversations, filters out a bunch of garbage. I mean, it's just, I can't even begin to cover it. Like that's a full 3-day course, I think, for Wireshark. Now, the good thing is if you go to the Wireshark website, they have a lot of tutorials and training as well on how to actually use Wireshark effectively. And they have wireless specific tools in here too for analysis. Hands down, between those tools, you can do, I'd say, I don't know, probably 80% of what you need to do when it comes to, oh, and I apologize, but I believe AeroDump also has the GPS hooks, so you can also war drive with it. It's been a while since I've played with AeroDump, but it's really, really good for doing on-the-fly target identification, filtering, things of that nature. Now, there's this other tool called BetterCap, and I have links to all these in the references for you as well. BetterCap is very handy. It started out as a network tool and then expanded with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth capabilities, and also has HID, human interface device tools. So if you have one of those, what is it? Logitech. Yeah. If you have a Logitech keyboard that's wireless and it's of a certain era, you can sniff all of those keystrokes and all those comms using BetterCap. But BetterCap is very fun because its Wi-Fi support makes it really easy to do things like capture handshakes, see what's going on around in the neighborhood. They have a GUI interface, but they also have a command line interface. So you can also run this on a Raspberry Pi, no problem. A spin-off of BetterCap is the Ponagochi. It runs BetterCap in the background, but it also includes some artificial intelligence and machine learning aspects for people who like to dabble in such things. It's really cute, and it's also annoying because it will kick you off your network if you're not paying attention or you don't configure it to not deauth things. It is really cool. It captures handshakes wherever you're at, whether it's just through listening or it's through selective deauthing, which is basically kicking devices off the network. But you know, the AI and the machine learning aspect of it is it tries to do it smartly, right? It's very much a low-key, low detection rate tool because it listens and it learns. And then at some point it goes, okay, I see all these access points around me, or I see all these clients around me. And it goes, I'm going to kick this one client off the network and I'm going to listen based on, you know, the parameters that I have. And I'm going to listen for the handshake. And then it collects the handshake. And it waits. And it waits and it's still listening. And then it does it for another thing. And the trick is it doesn't trigger wireless IDSs. So wireless intrusion detection system, if you go in there and you like knock everybody off the network with deauth packets, or you send like 20 deauth packets to one client, the wireless intrusion detection system, if it's an enterprise system, will go crazy and it'll be like, oh, somebody's attacking your network. This thing, super low power. You don't need the display on it, but it's kind of cute, right? And it has messages that show up and things like that, which is kind of fun, like hack the planet. And I mean, this is a GIF actually. So it's cycling through both in the top right and in the bottom. But it's just, it's a fun project for a Pi Zero and an e-ink screen. You know, with a single 18650 battery, it'll run for like, I think, all day. So Ponagochi. If you had a Tamagotchi, this is the hacker version. All right, Kismet Wireless. This is my tool of choice for 90% of what I do for war driving, because they are the original, one of the original, because Aircrack was also around, but Aircrack didn't come until a little bit later, because they were more focused on cracking the encryption for web, where Kismet started like literally right at the beginning of war driving, like 2000, 2001. I started using it in 2003. In fact, my first Wiggle upload was in 2003. I used Kismet. So as you can see here, this is just the, it's called an ncurses environment, which, you know, from a command line green screen, you could use it. It shows you the, excuse me, shows you the SSIDs that are out there, what type of access point it is, or what type of device it is. So A is access point, WEP, which is the W, yes or no, because WPA didn't exist at that point. What channel, how many packets you had collected. And if it could, it would determine the IP address range of the devices on there. And then, of course, GPS happening in the background. And it would keep stats on the right-hand side. And at one point, it also had a text-to-speech capability, so that as you were driving around, it would say things like open network detected, WEP detected, things like that. I don't know if it still supports that. I haven't messed with that in years, that aspect of it. Excuse me. This weather's been wrecking me. First it's hot and dry, then it got wet, now it's cold and dry. Now Kismet did an upgrade 2 years ago with this amazing, super configurable web-based interface. So if you're a web developer, you can take all the information on this, and even the information that's not shown, and you can create your own interface for it. Now it's touchscreen friendly. You can see here, because I was, well, actually, this isn't my screenshot. I grabbed this one off the internet. Tells you what type of device it is. The name on the left is either the BSSID or the SSID, or I'm sorry, or the a combination of the OUI and the BSSID, where it will cover the it'll show the manufacturer, and then the manufacturer name for the first half of the BSSID. Excuse me. It shows you the protocol, the type of crypto they're using. And so you can see WPA-CCMP. That's going to be an enterprise network. TKIP is going to be more of the personal, WPA2 personal. Last seen, how many packets, how many clients are attached to it. And then what's not shown here is you can select each one of those and it will show you a list of all the clients that are attached. It'll give you statistics on the data. if it's an open network, it gives you some really deep information. That the multicolored bar on the bottom is all the frequencies, all the channel hopping it's doing, and the detection over time, I believe, if I remember correctly. And that will scroll through. Oh, that says frequency and for the past minute. So that's 60 seconds of packet capture right there across all the frequencies. So there's lots of different ways to display the information. They've extended it to include Bluetooth. And if you think there's a lot of Wi-Fi out there, you should sniff Bluetooth. It's insane. It's pure insanity. In fact, oftentimes I leave Bluetooth off on Kismet because it just overwhelms the display and I'm really trying to focus on Wi-Fi. Even though I'm like, oh man, I wonder if there's any Bluetooth stuff out here, right? Or if I'm looking at the Aruba access points, for example, and I'm trying to sniff out their Bluetooth, that needs to be a more targeted attack. It also has plugins for software-defined radio. So if you know about ADS-B for tracking aircraft, it also supports that. Kismet Wireless. All right, if you're cracking hashes, Hashcat, it's a command line tool. It works on Windows. It works on Linux. I've used it in the cloud on my $300 of credit with a Google Cloud platform. That's a little tip. You can get an instance with 4 GPUs that I could not afford to purchase because they're like $3,000 a piece. And I linked up 4 of those bad boys, and you run Hashcat against hashes. It's not just for Wi-Fi. If you were sniffing hashes for like NTLM on a network, on like Windows shares, use that. You can crack those. You can crack. They support like 100 and something different hashing algorithms and protocols. They also added the most recent TKIP attacks, which are basically handshakes, but not the full 4-way handshake. So instead of having to listen for all 4 parts of the handshake, now TKIP is like one packet. And again, Matthew Van Hoof and his friends found a weakness in TKIP itself, such that you just need one of those, and then you can run Hashcat against it and brute force the password. Those guys are really big on math. Hence the mathy. Excuse me. All right, EAP hammer. Now this one's really fun because this one's more of a monster in the middle. It is a targeted evil twin attack against WPA2 Enterprise. Now the screenshot that you're showing here, I can't really explain everything that's going on here other than just know that one EAP hammer automated a bunch of the evil twin stuff. Before it used to be, okay, I'm going to set up my Airmon or Aero dump, and I'm going to see, okay, here's this AP and here's this AP, and this one's the one that I want to clone, and then I would have to go in and configure my laptop using host AP. I mean, it was like, I'm talking like an hour setup. This does it all with a single command. If you look at that Python command. Now there is a little bit of configuration that you do ahead of time, but it automated a ton of this stuff. Now this one's exceptionally insidious because if you notice, it not only picked up the MS Chap v2 EAP protocol information, but if you see where it says net NTLM, and NT LAN Manager, of course, is Windows version of it's their authentication mechanism for Windows Active Directory. So if you have an enterprise environment where they've tied their access point to Active Directory to control access, not only does EAP Hammer defeat the EAP, but now it also has Windows credentials that you can go and use like on their Windows network. So maybe the company has a Citrix VDI environment, which has virtual desktops that you can log into from the internet using those credentials. And if they don't have two-factor authentication, or now that I'm on the network anyhow, because I've defeated EAP, now I've got a set of credentials where I can go and browse file shares. I can just run amok on the network. And this is where EAP kind of falls on its face, right? So it was supposed to make it easy to manage by tying it into Active Directory. But with this attack, it ends up making you the impact, I should say, is super bad. So EAP Hammer. Also, the website for EAP Hammer, the developer Solstice, has a whole workshop that he continually updates and publishes on his website, and it's called Enterprise Attack Workshop or something. And really good step-by-step on how to just defeat the security. Did I say wireless is insecure? Yeah, I don't trust wireless. Was there a question? I saw the thing flash.
Actually, yeah, it says that we're past the password hacking, but if there's restrictions on the website's place on making passwords, actually makes them easier to brute force. So I guess the question is, some of the rules, like you have to have 8 to 16 characters with capital letters. Does that actually make them easier to brute force?
Yeah, so once you have password parameters, certainly a minimum and a maximum, what that does is it cuts down the amount of time that you spend on parameters that are outside of that. Now with web application hacking, there's some ways you can derive what those limitations are through some other techniques. When it comes to wireless, that's one of the things I should have mentioned earlier. I touched on with default installations. One of the oldest tricks in the book is if you are in front of a business and you can see their Wi-Fi, even if it's WPA2. If they don't have the phone number of the place on the front door and you can look it up online, try the phone number as a password. Like I don't have an exact number on that, but there are a lot of like AT&T and cable modem or, like Spectrum, whatever, cable modem installers that will literally set the password to the phone number of the place. So yeah, but and like I said, when you go back to the defaults, that kind of narrows it down to what you would expect. And depending on the protocol, I believe WPA2 requires 10 digits minimum. So don't waste your time, brute forcing 1 digit through 9 digits. And there are specific rule sets out there that other people have developed over time that are very effective. If you look at RenderMan is one of those folks who's been doing this a long time. Church of Wi-Fi. But yeah, like I said, it's a whole nother topic because there's a good amount of work that can be done in creating a good password cracking rule. But it's definitely it's just really satisfying when you see it work. Or you're like, I knew it. How could they be so dumb? Well, the reality is most people don't know what the implications are. Good question. All right, so other tools, and some of these are a little bit older. They're just worth mentioning. Wi-Fi is basically kind of a general. It searches the area. It gives you a list of access points. You select the access point, and then it gives you a handful of like attacks, well-known attacks that are all scripted. It's very much a script kiddie kind of a tool, but if you're looking for quick and dirty, the easy button. Reaver is similar, although it attacks the Wi-Fi protected system. Oh, how could I miss a whole section on that? So if your router or your access point has WPS, where you push the button on the top of the router to connect your laptop, for example, using a number, turn that functionality off, because Reaver, which that functionality has been rolled into things like Fern Wi-Fi Cracker and a Wi-Fi. That basically is a super easy way to defeat an access point. The concept is you need to push the button to enable or to trigger WPS, but there's some enterprising individuals who in Reaver basically are able to force the access point to kick it into that mode. And then I think it's a 6-digit number. It's like super easy, or 4-digit in some cases. It's super easy to brute force. Was there another question? I saw flashing again.
Yeah, there was a comment saying a few years ago routers would tell you if you got the first 4 digits of the WPS pin right. Cracking the pin would be less than 8 hours.
Yeah, it was. It's not a good system. They meant well, right? But Fern Wi-Fi Cracker, that's a GUI version of Wi-Fi. I feel like it has its own capabilities. The other two tools that I'm going to talk about, DriftNet. There's a screenshot of DriftNet on the right. DriftNet is for if you're on the network. And this actually works not just for wireless, but it works for a wired network. Although with wireless, you already have access to all of the traffic, where with a wired network, typically you have to do some trickery on the switch in order to get it to show you all the traffic. But Wi-Fi, it's just out there. What DriftNet does is it reconstructs images, and then it displays them in a window. Yeah, don't do it at work on the guest network. You know, the guest network that's wide open. Or, do it, but make sure you have your screen covered, because I did it once. And, if you have an iPhone, it probably has your name. And if you have a very unique name, remember I was talking about unique names? If you have a unique name and your unique name, your iPhone is called your unique names phone. And then I have DriftNet running and I see that you're, I don't know, on some really, really interesting websites that you could conceivably be blackmailed about. And you just happen to be on the board of directors at the company that I'm working at, you probably shouldn't do that. But DriftNet can definitely land you in HR jail because you will be shocked or not shocked as to what the employees around you are browsing on the network. Oh my gosh. And I just realized once the campus opens back up, campus Wi-Fi has got to be just well, I don't know. I'll let you experiment with that. DriftNet is an older tool, but extremely entertaining. Chaos Reader, a similar vein. Chaos Reader is an offline script that if you have a PCAP file, which means you've captured all these packets on a specific channel from a specific access point, whatever, Chaos Reader will reconstruct TCP traffic, whether it's images or music files or web pages, things of that nature. Chaos Reader is a older but fun tool. It's on GitHub. It's in the references that I have, but it's definitely one of those fun tools. Okay, all right. So I did it in just almost under 3 hours. Doesn't feel like 3 hours for me. I hope it doesn't feel like 3 hours for you. But I just tried to, kind of impress upon you the glories of Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi it combines multiple technologies to work. You need to understand radio frequencies, networking, packet analysis, cryptography. I'm probably leaving something out, but there's something for everybody in Wi-Fi. Or if you're like me, kind of a generalist, you get to dabble in all these areas. You know, Wi-Fi is being used in places you easily recognize, and in places you probably don't realize that it's being used unless you go looking for it. Oh, and I left off things like the license plate reader cameras. Those are fun. Those are in Carlsbad, but I think some of those are wired. I haven't been able to sniff any of those. But you know, the surveillance stuff just drives me crazy. Just know that the growing number of active Wi-Fi devices is going to make surveying, deconflicting, and securing Wi-Fi of greater importance as time goes on. So I hope I've inspired some of you to try out more Wi-Fi technology, and if anything, just have fun and go take somebody war driving. I mean, that's how I've not gotten any dates. But questions, concerns, because I think after that is my 14 pages of references. Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, I think what I'll do is I'll just let you talk if you can raise your hand.
Oh, you know, I can get out of the.
I also don't know if you want a minute to go grab another glass of water or something.
No, I'm fine. We only have like 10 more minutes. I don't want to keep everybody. And you can hit me up on Twitter. Just make sure you tell me you're from UCSD. Oh, there's the chat. Oh, let's see. War driving's on your bucket list. It needs to be a weekly routine or at least a monthly routine. Glad you thought it was awesome. I think it would be awesome if everybody went out and war drived. Certainly go through Wiggle. I mean, man, when I show muggles Wiggle, it's like chaos. Yeah, maybe some of you can give talks on some of the more academic aspects of Wi-Fi, because I mean, when you look at mathy stuff, it's way over my head, and a lot of math. The trilateration aspect of it is a lot of fun. GIS, any of the mapping stuff, definitely. Yeah, don't trust any computers for sure. In fact, I made stickers that say that. I can show you that. See, that's the other thing. I like handing out stickers when I see people in person. So if you were at one of my other talks, then oops. So I made the Trust No Computer sticker. I also made the Deploy Jenkins one and the unattended device one. So you see that this device was left unattended. But yeah. So whenever we have an in-person meeting, I'll be doing a sticker drop because I print them now by the thousands. Any other questions, comments, concerns? And you're not obligated to follow me on Twitter. My DMs are open. So I'm not a follower hog or anything. Your attendance code is hacker dude. Nice.
Yeah, we have a new code for every event. So
nice. Leet speak, huh? My hair's like 14 times longer than it normally is too. This is annoying. And I gained COVID-19 pounds. Try and stay healthy, folks. Go outside.
I'll stop the recording now.
What?